So today we have Ariel Weiss, who is an Alexander technique teacher and a very knowledgeable human being in the field of movement and body intelligence, body movement. And I want to thank you. I stumbled on the classes that Ariel gave in YouTube, and I was really mesmerized by the metaphors that she used that made the words become into a sensation in the body. And we are going to talk with her about her own journey to the Alexander technique and how this method can help the chronic pain community members. So thank you, Ariel, for coming and contributing of your knowledge. Can we just delve into the material and ask you to share your own personal story with pain?
Sure. Well, I first came to the Alexander technique. I guess it was a kind of pain. It was a kind of frustration. I have been dancing my entire life. And as a young dancer in college, I would say there was a building frustration that I was working as hard as I knew how, but that was not always translating into what I wanted in terms of my goals. And I wasn't always seeing I felt very limited. I was very painfully aware of my own limitations. And so I was first introduced to this work through a dance teacher in college who was suffering from back pain. And she went out into the world to find any resources that could help her. And so she was studying with an Alexander teacher and was bringing that Alexander teacher in to teach us little lessons. Mm-hmm. So interestingly, what my dance teacher was saying in dance classes was quite curious and of interest to me. For instance, my dance teacher was questioning how much effort did I need to execute a movement? Because my strategy as a young pushy dancer was to use everything I had. More effort is better. I'm very American. I come by it honestly.
No pain, no gain.
No pain, no gain. Supersize me culture. I love to make fun of Americans. I'm allowed. I'm American. Yes. But this was really the only strategy I knew. So it's the strategy I used. And I had some skill in some things, really good at jumping, really terrible at balancing on one leg and turning, because I was throwing myself literally with all that force off balance, and I didn't understand. So this idea of questioning, well, oops, sorry, that's my robotic camera. Let me send it back out. I talk to you without meaning to. There we go. So this idea of, well, how much do I need was a completely new notion for me and was quite fruitful. I could feel things starting to shift. I actually remember very specifically the movement that my teacher would talk about it. We used to do these lunges and then we would come back up. And so I was like throwing my whole body up and stiffening and not very comfortable. And she would talk about, well, if you toss your head lightly and you aim it up to the ceiling, all of a sudden I had balance and freedom of movement that I did not have previously. And I was very curious about that. But you and I were talking about this as we were just chatting. When I went for Alexander lessons, that's not what I got. What I got in Alexander lessons was no. No, 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 no. On and on with a hand on my back, telling me not to do anything.
Wow.
Just to think it. And I had no concept of what that was.
Yeah.
It was not a good match for me.
Yeah.
In fact, those lessons increased my frustration
and strain
and increased my muscular tension. Go figure. Not a good fit. So my teaching today is so informed by my own personal experience as an 18-year-old feeling like an utter failure with an Alexander teacher. But luckily, something made me curious. I think it was from my dance teacher. And I tried again several years later in my 20s. And that teacher didn't say, no, 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 don't do it. That teacher said, delicately let your whole head move and let your whole body follow to come into balance. And that's on my TED Talk. And that was the game changer. That moment I experienced choosing something different in my own movement habits. And I experienced much greater success at what I wanted, which in that moment was to balance on one leg. So that got me curious and hooked. And I kind of haven't looked back since. That was, I think, 1982 is when I started studying with that teacher. I moved to Philadelphia in 1985. I trained and graduated in 1988 and have been teaching this work and learning more and more every day from each and every one of my students since then.
Yeah, that's true. It's a lifetime teaching. Can you maybe share? So you didn't suffer of a specific pain, but what kind of miracles do you see in your clinic when people, with what kind of issues people are coming and they are feeling better after, feeling relieved?
I think I actually want to start in kind of a broad stroke way, which is to say that I actually think one of the most important things I'm doing with and I call them students. That's kind of a classical way to talk about our work. We have Alexander Technique teachers and our clients are students. And I have stuck with that language because I quite like it, that it's really about investigation. It's really about learning. And because it's something you learn to do for yourself. People often feel better when they leave my studio. I am not opposed to them feeling better. It's absolutely wonderful. But I don't call myself a healer, even though oftentimes healing happens because of the agency. It's my students learning a toolkit that they can help themselves. So I just want to kind of.
Yeah, of course. So I think this is the spirit of the method, no?
Well, I think it's taught with different spirits, but it's certainly the spirit I'm aiming for. Yeah. But I think one of the most important foundational things I'm doing with my students is saying, I don't know what's possible. I approach every new student and every new situation with, I don't know what's possible. Let's find out. So I have an implicit trust in the process of investigation. And so many, many times people come to my studio because they're desperate. They have tried many, many things, but I actually just had a student here this morning who was in tears. And she just needed a moment because she'd been to see a lot of people that hadn't helped her and hadn't given her the information and experience.
What did she say?
And so just to...
I didn't get it.
Well, she has many musculoskeletal pain patterns, many musculoskeletal pain. And she was so grateful just to have another way in. And so I don't promise, I am not medically trained. I don't cure anything. But here's the wonderful, magical thing. When we learn to reduce the interference that we don't know we're doing necessarily, we allow ourselves to function optimally. I mean that physically, I mean that mentally, psychologically, musically, creatively, spiritually. We don't come apart. We are a very dynamic system.
Yes.
And so when we enter the system and we allow things to function at their best, I don't know what your potential is. I would never presume to know what you are or are not capable of.
But let's talk about the results. What are the results? I understand and I appreciate it takes humility to come to with this kind of approach to the world.
Yes.
But
right.
In the end of the day, which kind of of cures or healing you see? Can you share from the experience?
Sure. So I have students that suffered migraines really regularly that were able to basically not have migraines anymore.
Just because of this, because there was no pressure and compression of the, go figure, yeah.
Go figure. I'm remembering a student that lived in a 4-story home, and she was severely asthmatic. And when she would get to the top floor, she would be wheezing very uncomfortably. And so I helped my student come into balance, and she was able, the first time I helped her up those stairs and she got to the top landing, she looked at me. She couldn't believe she wasn't wheezing. She was so joyous. Now, here's the thing. I did not cure her asthma.
Oh.
No one knows how to cure asthma.
Sure.
What I helped her do was, in my silly language, I love a good shortcut, I helped her take the parking brake off before she hit the gas. We reduced the resistance, or in Alexander's language, the downward pull, because when you slump and are pulling down, you're creating less room for your breathing mechanism, so it has to work harder. And if you have a compromised breathing mechanism, that's not going to go well. So just by alleviating those interferences, she functioned way better than she knew she was capable of. Because once you know, well, I'm asthmatic, I can't do that, you're automatically setting limitations. So again, just feel like, I don't know what's possible, let's find out. She was ecstatic.
Of course.
So there are many, many stories I can share. My student that when they first came to see me, his back was in such terrible disrepair. He had spent a year crawling to the bathroom. It's the most extreme case I've ever, and I didn't see him in that acute period. I saw him when he was post the acute period, but still so anxious and nervous about the health of his back. It was ruling his life. And we worked together many, many years. And every once in a while, I still get a text message or an email from him when he's traveling, because he's so delighted that not only can he travel and he can sit on a plane for 12 hours and he can carry his camera equipment and he can ride a bike again, he's reclaimed so much of his life that he didn't ever think was possible.
Wow. Can I ask you, I want to ask you about what is behind the system in a more mechanistic way of thinking. If someone, for example, has a bulging disc, and this bulging disc is compressing a nerve, which creates a constant contraction in the muscles downward. Let's say a cervical bulging or herniated disc, which is constantly activating the muscles in the, let's say, the sternocleidomastoid, the scalenes, all the rotator cuffs and the arm of the hands. If this is a given, if this situation is a given that the nerve is pushing, what is the mechanism that the Alexander technique uses in order to defy this, to counteract this constant activation of the muscles by the nerves?
Well, luckily, muscles can learn. Muscles are very teachable. And we have to send them a new message and I like to use the word invitation, because to me, sometimes the classical language in Alexander's work is directions. But for me, especially if I shared a little bit of my history, those directions felt a little bit like bullying to me.
Wow.
And then I got to feel not quite bullying.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, and so to me, I wonder if, or I talk about turning our curiosity on. So when someone's got a chronic pain pattern like that, usually the way I would start is the part is within the whole. So pain is a very strong, loud message. And I do not recommend ignoring it. It is information. But if that information becomes a sinkhole and all we are is our pain, that's quite limiting. And so can I listen to the pain and ask, how do you relate to the community of all of me? Sometimes I call it the integrated classroom because I'm cheesy. I have a sense of humor. Yes. So I go, okay, I have an injured right shoulder right now. And I ask, how does that part of me relate to what's above and below? How can I be part of this community?
Yeah.
So the first thing is to get someone to literally zoom out, because almost always we zoom into pain. So the first step is to zoom out and to ask, I would probably go for movement next. Like, I don't know what movement is possible within a range that's not painful. That might be minuscule. I might need to slow it down. Often I ask people to soften if it's hurting. And often I ask people to make it smaller. Mm-hmm. And so together we can just explore what those possibilities are. So if my right shoulder is bothering me, I ask my left to help inform me about my full width, so that I'm not zoning in, I'm including a sense of that part of me.
Yeah.
And then next, I would probably go to where is support available. So instead of asking my shoulder to fix itself, what's actually holding my shoulder up? Well, we have a sternum that's responsible for the suspension of my collarbone.
Yeah, the clavicles, yes.
Right, the sternoclavicular joint. And then what's underneath is my pelvis and my feet. And so can I ask my shoulder, right, to actually be held up by my feet and my shoulder? So again, I'm not just, what's wrong with you? Right? I go, oh, there's support available from below. Lately I've been calling this fountaining. Oh. And I like to use images, right? Because they're grab and go ideas. I don't want a list of directions and make sure I'm checking it off and being correct, but I'm emulating a fountain that goes up in the center and cascades out, right? So I'm not trying to hold myself up with my arms. My arms get to be the cascading. Sometimes I talk about arms as weeping willow trees, right? So I cascade out and down. Yeah, because we don't cascade down our arms, we cascade out and down. And then I check back in with my shoulder and I go, oh, that feels a little bit more supported.
Wow, this is beautiful. Just by doing it in my imagination, I think. So can I ask you, I didn't mean to ask you this. You use lots of analogies and metaphors and images in your teaching, which is brilliant. How does this contribute? You know, and we know that visualization is a tool in the healing process. People imagine and things mysteriously, or if almost in a supernatural way. Sometimes it manifests. So I wonder, what is your take on these images, metaphors? How do they contribute to
yeah,
so in the direction towards healing?
Yeah, well, I have another confession to make, which is that my Alexander teacher, my mentor, Marge Barstow, was quite adamant that images were not a good idea. She did not use them. She did not like them. And again, I think there's more than one way to teach this work. So why am I using them? Well, I use them because they help my students, frankly. And if I try to trace back where I think that comes from, in a lot of my dance training with idiokinesis specifically, Lulu Swigard's work and Bartiniev's work. And I had the great honor to study with Irene Dowd in my graduate work at Wesleyan University. These are all dance body image teachers. This beautiful use of imagery that I found quite helpful as a dancer. Also, I am an artist. I am not just a dancer. I was a choreographer for 30 years. And when I stopped making dances, I realized I was surprised that I didn't miss it that much, because my teaching is my creative life. And so this willingness to let my imagination go, and I don't want my students working hard. That's what I knew how to do. I knew how to work hard, but investigate, inquire, explore, not know what's right, that need to liberate ourselves from how our patterns of learning are. That's much more the focus of my teaching these days. And so I think these images are a way to invite people in to their imagination and their creativity, to their not knowing, right? And just more of that allowing. It's my way of saying, no, don't do it. I just have a very different way of inviting people into that process. And so I'm always looking for the movement metaphor that clicks with someone. And the same ones don't click for everyone. So like I just did that. I put more than one out at the same time. I talked at a fountain, and then I talked about a weeping willow tree. And I don't mean to confuse you. I mean to invite you into the way that resonates best for you. So when we're using imagery, what I learned from Marge is keep your eyes open and find out if that image is doing and inviting what we want, which is freeing ourselves into balance. For instance, string pulling my head, I don't like that image because I've never seen anyone find buoyant balance. Almost always I see people overstretching and stiffening. And so if that image is helping you come into buoyant balance, by all means go ahead, but you need to know what it's doing. It's not just, is it a good image? Because we're always translating. And so I have to understand that dynamic process of translation. Same thing with Mr. Alexander's directions. Allow my neck to be free in order that my head can move forward and up, in order that my back can lengthen and widen and limbs free away. Beautiful, but how many times have I seen people overdo it? That's not what Mr. Alexander meant. That's not it. So
it's more strange.
If those classical directions and string image are actually freeing you, go right ahead, but find out.
What is your image for the Folkung from the Atlanta Occipital? Which image do you use there?
So glad you asked. So my newest version of talking about head balance, and I say that because I'm constantly evolving and coming up with better ways. And actually, this is a little bit of a funny story. So for a couple of years, I was using the image. This is not a very good one, my disclaimer, but I asked my students to imagine a chopstick with a Cheerio on it, a round cereal bit that could rotate freely, right? And I was like, that's a terrible image. It'll come to me eventually. I'll find a better image. And finally, one day, wow, was I excited when I finally, eureka, right? So one day I went, oh, Ferris wheel cars. Do you know what a Ferris wheel ride is?
No.
It's a ride at an amusement park. And there's square cars that you get into, and the cars are in a big circle. Oh. And then there's one in London. What's the one in London called? A really big Ferris wheel. And then the cars rotate.
It's like the skateboarding, that people do skateboarding on the...
It's the same shape. I can't remember. The London Eye, is that what it's called? You get in the car and then the whole thing rotates in a circle.
Oh, I will look it up. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. Ferris wheel. You know what? I'll do a post on my Instagram for you.
Oh,
I'll
thank
do a picture of a Ferris wheel. So the point is that that car has to rotate freely around an axis,
Oh,
because otherwise, as it starts moving, it would dump the people out. So the car is always rotating freely around an axis so that it can stay parallel to the ground. And so then I realized that's what we're doing with our head, is we're just allowing free rotation. It's not that it always has to be forward, because then you get people looking like this and stiffening up.
yeah.
And there are Alexander teachers that look like that, but not when they come out of my studio. Thank you very much. Because most of the time when we slump, if I show you, my head is actually rotating back.
Mm-hmm.
So forward head position, right? Forward head position is when we displace our head forward because our neck is extended, but our head is rotated back.
Oh.
So if I'm looking down at the floor, by dropping down from the base of my neck, my head actually rotated the wrong way.
That's right. So your direction here is to take the head forward, but the back of the head.
So I let my head travel back and up in space as I allow free rotation.
Oh,
And I'm going to show you more about that right now.
It's like a momentum that you take. It's like, you know, in the sitting exercise, after you do the monkey and you go back in order to, it's like the arch that you take the arrow back.
Yes.
So you take the head
Yes.
a little bit back in order for it to glide on the
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And there's more. So faces are like ovals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet skulls are actually spheres.
Oh.
So when we look at people's faces, we're looking at their skull and a jaw. But your jaw is only in the front. It's not in the back. Which means that our skull is weighted towards the front. So I've got my fingers on the bumps underneath our skull, and those condyles are where your skull rests in your top spine bone, your atlas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So my forearm is being a spine.
Yes.
And my fingers are balancing right where your spine balances on your skull balances on your spine. If I let go, my head is going to fall forward every time. If I start in balance and I let go, there is more weight in the front.
Yeah.
And so here in the United States, we call that nodding off.
Yeah.
So when someone starts falling asleep, unless they start way back here, they will fall forward because there's more weight in the, right? I'm not lying. That's your jaw.
It's amazing because he says, you know, the primary control is to take the head forward and up. It's almost the opposite of what you're saying.
Well, but it depends on what's going forward. Because if I put my face forward, yes, and up, Mr. Alexander called that back and down. So you're not wrong, I'm not wrong, but boy, do we need to agree. So join me, please, in a very simple exploration. Please grasp your fists. Do it as tightly as is comfortable for you. And then please notice what happens if you cease grasping. Just let go. Great, and repeat. So I tighten and grasp, and all the parts go in towards the center concentrically. And when I release, there is expansive movement out and away. I didn't create the out and away. I ceased pulling in. So your neck is quite big. Your neck muscles attach way down here. Find your collarbones, please. They're this beautiful horizontal bridge. And it's a beautiful little ridge that lots of muscles grab onto. And then we have another ridge in the back along our shoulder blade. And there's another beautiful ridge, which lots of neck muscles get to attach to. So that's the base of the mountain. And so if I just have this idea of releasing, my shoulders might widen. Yes.
Wow.
I might just soften and let, but there's more to my neck. There's this whole volume here. And then there's lots of attachments. They come under my chin and they come up, especially those bumps behind your ears and up into the back of your skull. So I like to think of that like an egg cup. Do you know what an egg cup is? When you put a soft boiled egg, balances. So if you make that really soft, make your egg cup really soft. Yes, your head's already moving, because when you softened your neck, your head started rolling forward. Why? Because there's more weight in the front. So then in that moment of softening my neck and allowing my head to start to roll forward, I don't want to nod off, right? I have things to do. So when I let my neck soften and my head starts to roll forward, that's a rotational movement forward, not a spatial direction. It's rotational relative to my own self. And then I use my seat and my feet to send my spine into length. So in that moment of softening, I let my head start to roll forward so that I can find length. There you go.
But you said to take in the momentum a little bit back in order to lengthen it. So it will not.
Yes, because if my head is out over my lap, right? I need to be over my base.
That's right.
So I'm going to allow my head to come over my base, which is back in space.
I see.
But I'm not going to throw my head back because that doesn't do anything. So as I come back in space, that's the Ferris wheel. Back and up and allow the forward rotation. And then there's my beautiful length.
Beautiful. Wow. Wow. So you see the images do something, you know, it's like we are imagining squeezing lemon on the tongue and something happens in the body. We salivate and
we always do what we think. We are always embodying our thinking. And the beauty of Mr. Alexander's work is that we learn that we can change how we think. Also, when you change how you move, it changes how you think. You know, depression. Depression, what is depression? Well, I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, right? I don't cure depression. It's not my area of expertise. And yet, of course, I have people who are depressed that come into my studio. Lots of human beings suffer from that malady. And I have a story, another story from a student many, many years ago that I learned so much from, who was physically looked depressed, because depressed people don't look like this.
Yeah, they look old.
Depressed people look down. Depression is down, yes?
Right.
And they look weighed down. They feel weighed down. So here was the beauty in this moment years ago. I had a student who was physically quite down.
Yes.
Her language shared with me, she told me that she had been quite depressed, but was feeling so much better now. Was feeling so grateful and so much better. And I'm watching her and I'm seeing the Wizard of Oz, the two directions. I believed her.
Yes.
And I also noticed that physically she had not caught up to where she was psychologically.
Of course.
There was a puzzle.
Yeah, a dissonance.
And so I helped that student was already thinking differently. She had gone to a therapist and done a lot of good work. And I helped her bring her body to her present mental state. So it's not a one-way street. It's a dynamic system. It all affects one another. So if I start moving, what's the most important thing a depressed person can do? Move. Go take a walk.
Can I ask you, what is your metaphor? I love the willow bush, the willow leaves.
Weeping willow.
Weeping willow, and you know, the mountain and the Ferris ride.
Ferris wheel.
Ferris wheel. What is your metaphor? preferred metaphor for softening? How do you make the word soften your neck to something tangible, or soften the ribs, or soften the fingers, the tips of the finger?
I'm not thinking of one. Sometimes I will ask my students to imagine. So for instance, for fingertips leading, I might think about dandelion puffs, right? Just come up with some image. Or for ribs, a lot of times I'm a bit obsessed lately with micro movement.
No.
I'm a little obsessed because I find, Anat, that when our language is all about directions, some of us, I'll put myself at the head of the class, want to give it our all. Remember me with working harder? Like, I'm so good at that. It's such a strong habit that if I only give directional language, a lot of us will, like, do you ever drive with someone in a car who only knows how to hit the gas like really hard and you're afraid you're going to go through the window? So that subtlety of calibration, of effort, the subtlety and the range, right? The agility to calibrate as needed. So that idea of, is it moving? Is it moving? So in my TED Talk, I had people stand and close their eyes and just notice that there's micro movement when you're standing. You're not still. We're never still. We're breathing, we're pumping blood, we're having ideas. All of that is movement on a nervous system level, on a respiratory, digestive, like we're moving. We're always moving. And so allowing that micro movement and celebrating it will often be a beautiful way into softening. Just by taking the parking brake off, right? Because if I stand still, I have to physically engage the brakes. So if I release the brake and see what wants to move, that's kind of a side doorway into softening. So I might use images of things that are pleasant. Can you imagine your hand moving along silk, right? Which would be different than corduroy, yes?
Oh, yeah.
So again, I do have some images, like the nodding on is what I'm calling that head balance, is one that I'll use over and over again. And maybe in a coaching with someone, I'll just be inspired by what I'm seeing. But you also want to know, with those metaphors, I'll never forget the day I was so excited about my Ferris wheel car analogy. And then today I have a student that doesn't know what a Ferris wheel car is, right? That won't work for you. And then one day I was teaching a group class and my student looked up at me and said, I really don't like Ferris wheels. And I said, oh, then we're not going to use that image for you, because it made her tighten her neck because she's scared of that ride. So one size does not fit all.
That's right.
And I please say that over and over again.
But even if you just use opposite words, like I heard it in one of your YouTube videos, notice the difference between a hinge and rotation, which is up and over. This made the difference, and now you added the, just by looking at the skull, at the skeleton that you showed, that the head, the back of the head is so back, and you can take it in order so it will not nod off. And then you raise, and then you
rotational movement. Yes, rotation, which means the back of your head's going up. As your nose and eyes go down, the back of your head's going up. It's a rotational movement.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. And also I have another metaphor that you said, which I loved, which is the tail lights versus the front
headlight.
Yeah, nice.
Right. So I came up with that analogy because a lot of times Alexander teachers are overemphasizing what's going on with head balance. And we're doing that because we understand, Mr. Alexander called that our primary control, that if this balance of our head and our spine is disrupted, it's interfering with all of your functioning. And so there's a reason why we start there. It's of primary importance.
So what happened?
However, the part within the whole, if you're only paying attention to your head balance, I cannot tell you how many students came into my studio and wanted to know if they had it right yet. Is that it? Do I have it? And I would be like, how did I possibly teach that? I did not mean to teach that. It's not a place. It's not right, wrong. There's always a little opportunity to be more in balance in life. There is always a little bit of an opportunity to be welcome more integration. We don't run out. We might be compromised. We have aging bodies. Luckily, I'm so happy to be aging. I welcome the compromises. I'm around long enough to be compromised.
Yeah.
I'm active in my life enough to be compromised, right?
So
I don't live under a glass dome.
This is amazing what you're saying now, because many people dread the aging process and what it brings. And for example, now you told me that you have a shoulder issue, a frozen shoulder in the right. So what is now your relationship with pain or limitation or loss of range of motion? What is your inner self-talk when you notice discomfort in the body or sensitivity or pain?
Yeah. Well, I'm inviting myself to not ignore the pain. It is information. And I invite myself to ask, what do you need today? Right? And to make a little bit more time to attend to my shoulder. And we always get smarter when we're injured. It's not fun. I'm not celebrating that I have an injury, but I'm old enough and wise enough to know that through the many kinds of challenges I've had in my life, there's usually some lemonade there somewhere. I have some pretty extraordinary lemonade in my life from some pretty difficult situations. I'm a cancer survivor, so I think I come by it honestly that I am so grateful to be here. I wanted so much to have the honor to watch my daughter grow up. And my daughter's 26, so I'm good. I'm so grateful. Yes.
Nice.
And so if I don't choose to be a victim and I go, why is this happening to me?
Right.
Oh, well, that's a pretty stuck place for me. And so it's hard though. It's not like I haven't had my moments. Trust me, when I was first diagnosed with cancer, I had a few why me moments.
Sure.
I am a human being.
Natural, yes.
And then I also get to see the lemonade, which is how much sweeter, how much sweeter it is to enjoy this day. So I try not to lose the lemonade.
You are optimistic by nature. Like I can observe that. Maybe not a happy-go-lucky type, but you do have a tendency to be very positive, and good for you. It's an asset, I think. Wow.
I think that's a skill that comes from this work, that constant ability to let the data inform me, right? So if I notice, oh, that's really stressing me out, then I have a choice. I have to go, oh, that's a strong stimulus for me. How would I like to respond? I have some choices. Our habits are automated. We need automated habits. But when the automation becomes a prison and that you have lost all choices, then maybe that's not the habit we want to keep. And we can practice new habits. We can choose new habits, and we absolutely get good at what we practice. And so that reframing that I do, right? I call it turning the coin on the other side,
yes,
right?
Yes.
There's always another side. There's always another side. And it doesn't mean that you're happy that you're in pain. I'm not ever suggesting that.
Yeah, of course.
But that pain might have something to inform us about, and it might help us like really embody our whole selves, right? It might insist that we learn another way.
Yeah, our vulnerability maybe as well. And can I ask you, so you are a cancer survivor. Um, regarding the healing process, what was the resource that helped you, the inner resource that you summoned to overcome and win the game, win the battle?
Well, there's a very specific moment that I remember during my treatment. It was a challenging time. It was a very challenging time in my life.
Sure.
And it felt like a lot of my life was falling apart.
Sure.
And I was lying on a radiation table, and it was very cold, and I had to go every morning. And it felt a little bit, I'm sorry for laughing, but it, you know, for me, walking into a hospital every day was kind of charged. My father had a serious heart condition when I was quite young. And so hospitals were kind of scary to me. It was just my personal history, I think for many people. So this walking to the hospital every day, and then they literally drew on my body a target to aim the radiation. So I am literally a human target in a cold room with people looking at one part of my body, right? They were very nice, but this is what was happening. And they were shooting radiation into my body. And I realized one morning, lying very cold on this table, that I felt like a victim. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a human target and they're aiming things at me. And I was upset and I was mad and I was frustrated and I was sad and all kinds of emotions came up.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I went, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I want this radiation, thank you very much, because I do not want any cancer cells. Be gone.
Right.
I want your help because you're helping get rid of cancer cells. That's the purpose.
Yeah.
And I
shifted.
Lying on the table, I went, oh, come on in. And I created a sound. This is all completely intuitive in the moment. And I went, oh, you know, a big street broom. So I had a little sound because it's very loud too, radiation's very, very loud. And so I had my own sound, get rid of them, bye. So I invited the aggressor, right? I was like, oh no, you're my teammate. It's not us against them. You're not doing something to me. You're doing something with me.
An ally.
And we are an ally. You are my ally, my partner, my collaborator, because cancer cells be gone. And in that moment, I knew I had just partnered with my own healing.
Wow.
And then all it was a redirection, which is what Alexander technique is all about. So thank goodness I had practiced all those years. So in that moment, I redirected. Now I did it creatively with my imagination, right? But that's what I did. I redirected the intentionality of that moment. I'm not a victim here.
Yeah. You shifted.
Thank you for helping me.
You shifted the paradigm, that the operating system that was running the show. And wow, you see, the imagination is an asset. So what would you say, what if you had to instill one insight from your experience and from your students' experience, if someone is hearing you and he is in the end of the road, in despair, and in pain, what would you tell him? You know, and there is a loss of dignity when you live in a constant chronic pain. It's like a self-defeat. Many people feel it like a self-defeat. And you mentioned aging, let alone aging, which many times bring you know, decrease in range of motion, in the ability to function freely in a supple body, in an agile body. So
Absolutely.
what would you tell someone who is hearing you and is desperate, in despair, lost hope?
Yeah. Well, I actually want to give a shout out to a colleague and friend of mine, Mio Morales, who has developed a way of working with people with Alexander's principles exclusively online. And he's really been a pioneer in the field. So I want to give a little shout out to him. And I rather like, I'm going to paraphrase his work. So this is my take on his work. I'm not an expert in his work. But Mio does a very beautiful and profound and very simple thing, which is he asks his students, they do a practice, they do a ritual of holding their thumb and then their finger and then their neck. It's just a practice. And what you do is you ask, where do I feel ease?
Oh yeah, I know this. Yeah,
where do I feel ease? And so there's just, that's a redirection, right? Because pain is so loud and so consuming. And so it's not that you don't let the pain tell you, but you don't allow it to steal all of your attention. And so by asking, where do I feel ease? We're inviting a redistribution of our attention.
Oh.
Yes. And we're taking back control and asking the ease to inform the pain, right? So maybe my heel feels easy.
It is done subconsciously.
And
this is done
just by refocusing onto the ease instead of, oh, my shoulder hurts, right? That can start to shift things. To me, that would be the easiest, simplest way in to a student with chronic pain.
Why does he instruct to hold the fingers while doing this?
I think it's a way just to keep time and just to have a process. It's just I would call it a ritual. I don't know if he would call it that. I kind of like ritual and procedure. And so, you know, people do Tai Chi and they do it for a lifetime and they study within the form, right? So some of us prefer a form or a ritual, and some of us prefer, you know, you and I are dancers, right? And so some people are terrified of freeform dance. Like they're like way too shy and self-conscious, and they want someone to tell them how to move, right? So I don't think that's essential. I just think that gives it form, is my guess.
Asked because you mentioned before the closed chain. I thought it has something to do with the closed chain kinematic.
Yeah, it could, absolutely. That would be, that's a great guess.
Can I ask you, you mentioned before, I want to go back to the Alexander technique. You mentioned the main role of these hidden joint, the atlanto-occipital joint, as the one that arranges the downstream everything. If someone has, of course, we are not symmetrical, but there is a difference between a natural asymmetry and an unnatural asymmetry. Like when you abuse the natural asymmetry and it becomes really horrible. Like the one side is very tonified, is overly tonified, while the other side is very weak and under tonified. How would this direction of free your neck in order so the head will float up and forward? How does this coincide with the terrible asymmetry that one feels? And I think I told you before, it is related to the trauma reflex. If there is a huge difference between the sides, according to Thomas Hanna, this represents a traumatic event that is holding in the body. So
So my instincts again follow what I outlined earlier. So I would get you to notice. So I'm asymmetrical. So if we put our finger on the tip of our nose, those bumps on the bottom of your skull can rock forward and back, and that's this motion, nodding.
Yeah.
Yes. But right, so that's rotating through the axis through your ears.
So
but we can also
up and over, right?
Well, it's this. It's rocking like a rocking chair. That's the bumps sliding in Atlas.
You mean the condyles?
The condyles, exactly.
Okay.
But those condyles, in addition to going forward and back, can go side to side. Those same condyles. So that's this motion. So if I rotate around the axis of my nose, I'm more weighted on this condyle. And if I go this way, I'm more on that condyle, and my head loves to go this direction. So then I slow it down and make it smaller and make it softer and just ask, is it okay to weight this condyle? But here's the funny thing. What's happening here is either prevented or supported by what's happening below, right? Or even caused. So then I go to my two rockers on my sit bones and I put more weight on one sit bone and I go, oh, does that feel familiar? And I put weight more on the other sit bone and I go, is that familiar? And then I just play with the quartet of rockers. So can I ask my torso to be supported on both sides of my pelvis, not just the side I love to weight? And can I weight my skull in both condyles? And I recalibrate. I ask, where am I sharing the load?
You play.
So I don't do it with a mirror. I don't do it with a mirror and like, am I straight?
Yeah, yeah.
Because then you'll just force it.
No,
so I ask my kinesthetic sense to recalibrate, because this feels real. Man, I hang out here all the time. So then I just question the authority of that habit and say, can I share the load? Can I share the load? And then I'm noticing if I hold in my ribs, I can't share the load very well. So there's that micro movement. I have to let the change happen in my whole torso to find a new balance.
Yeah, many times.
So I have to question the authority of status quo. I have to tune in to myself and ask for possibility over and over. So make sure you have fun. You're gonna repeat that much. Don't bring your bully. But I need to find a way to wrap up this chapter if we can.
Yeah, we have to. And I'm very grateful for anything that you shared. It was beautiful and to be continued.
Well, I definitely want to invite everyone. I've been, for once in my life, I am on a current trend. It's not usually me, especially with technology, but the newest kind of social media, I shouldn't say the newest, because no doubt there's one that's newer that I don't know about, but Reels. Reels are these short little videos that you'll see popping up, especially on Instagram. And I've been making these 1-minute little instructional videos. And I have a request, which is I want people to tell me what they want me to talk about, because that helps inspire me. I think you can see that when you ask me a question, it inspires creativity. So I love questions and requests. So I put my Instagram is AT_Phila. I put it in the chat, and I invite everyone to come check out a class of mine online, but also send me a request and I will make a reel for you on my Instagram.
Sure. So it's AT_Phila, like Philadelphia. AT Alexander.
Yes, but it's underscore. And I put it in the chat so you can see.
Sure, with pleasure. So thank you so much, Ariel. It was a delight, a sheer delight to talk to you. And as I told you, I'm also excited about these creative metaphors. So thank you for the work. And
Bavakasha, toda rabba for the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
I look forward to our next meeting.
Sure.